Well, one of the major problems we have with non-functional requirements is that they have to be measurable in some way, shape, or form. One of the problems we have faced over the years with them is they are subjective. Very often people give you non-functional requirements in terms that you can't really prove or disprove without a human interpretation. So we have to find a way of removing the subjectivity from the non-functional requirements and making them measurable. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. Their objectively measurable requirements would say something like 10,000 transactions per hour. You can see there's a specific number there. I can test that. I can prove whether or not my application will be able to process 10,000 transactions per hour. 1 second response time, again, a number. As long as there's a number there, I can set up a test and I can prove whether or not my application meets that number. 6 beers in a 6-pack. There's a very good example. Count to 6, you know whether or not it has been met. On the subjective side, however, we have words like easy to maintain. The system has to be easy to maintain. It has to have high quality, or I only drink good German beer. There's no way that I can measure any of those 3 qualities without having a judge or somebody come back and say this is what they should have been and you did or did not meet them. I can't really test them before the fact. In order to make sure that I have a good understanding that I have good high quality non-functional requirements, I need to get measurable qualities. Well, because the human beings are notoriously difficult at giving me these exact numbers, we have worked for many years, basically decades in the IT world at trying to find ways of quantifying subjective requirements. Because the performance requirements are defined, basically defining attributes of the application such as how often, how many, how fast, when I'm asking people in the business community to give me these numbers, they really have no basis. They have no idea. How many transactions do we need an hour? I don't know. Right now we're processing 10,000 an hour. So that's a starting point. If I look at that and I say, okay, then I'm going to develop my application to be able to process 10,000 transactions per hour, and I deliver that application and all of a sudden your business increases and you're doing 30,000 transactions per hour. If I did not design the application to be scalable, I would be not able to meet that new demand. The performance requirements are not something that anybody in particular defines at one point. They're actually things that need to be defined at every point in the analysis or in the development process. They're going to be developed by the business community first and foremost, yes. We need the business community's input on how many, how fast, how often. But as the person responsible for defining the application, for defining the business need, I have to make sure that I'm asking the right questions and that I'm getting the information that I need in order to be able to tell the IT department what kind of performance we expect or what kind of performance has to be there in order for the application to be satisfactory. And of course, the developers, the IT department itself, are going to be defining some performance requirements. Some of them based on the hardware, by the way. Ultimately, there are certain things that we can and cannot do with the hardware, depending upon the infrastructure you're working with. And all of these factors have to be taken into account. And it's because of that that all of these things are very challenging dimensions of getting good performance requirements. Well, in the vein of trying to ask the right questions, there are a few questions that we can suggest that we've tried over the years that have proven to unveil at least a decent set of performance requirements, critical performance requirements, which if they aren't met, cause projects to fail. The first one is the frequency question. The frequency question asks, how often will a function be used? Meaning, what causes this to be used and how often does that event happen? We'd also be interested in whether these transactions are going to be all done at this, in one fell swoop, or ad hoc, or during peak times. Is there a variation in the frequency? Sometimes it's low, sometimes it's high. Second question is urgency. Now, the urgency question, there are 2 dimensions to the urgency question. The response urgency, which is how long can people wait on information from the application before they can no longer do their job, and the input urgency, also known as the update urgency, which is how long can the application wait on input from a human being before the application fails. The third question here is the volume question. And the volume question has specifically to do with the data. Whenever this function is performed, whenever the application is doing this, how much data is it dealing with? How much input, how much output? You can talk about how many pages, how many records, how many screens, any kind of dimension that talks about the data side and gives the IT department an idea of the volume. These questions are very critical because if I have an application that has to deal with humongous amounts of data, I'm going to have to spend more time making sure that that is more efficient so that it can get that data processed in the allotted time. The accuracy dimension. Anytime you ask the business community how accurate do you need the data to be, the answer you get is 100%. The only problem we have, the universe is not 100% accurate. If you look at it at the quantum level, it's a crapshoot. So ultimately, what we're really trying to get at is how precise does the data have to be that the application creates, and how current does it have to be, meaning how timely does it have to be in order for it to be considered accurate by the business community. What kind of errors can you tolerate is another way of asking the accuracy question. The category of constraints is a lot broader, as we've indicated, and because of that, we can give you some general groupings to think about, because not all constraints obviously apply in all applications. But if you think about, first off, natural limits, anything that would limit the ability of the application to do things, and these are things we say are enforced by nature. That's the speed, like the speed of light, temperatures, if you're dealing with any kind of system measuring temperature, or time. If you're doing a real-time system, time becomes absolutely essential. Laws and regulations is another area to take into account for constraints. And laws and regulation obviously have anything that any regulatory body has the authority to stipulate or to mandate that your application follow. Policies and rules. Business policies and rules are created within your organization, but usually not within your project. We have to make sure that whoever has the authority in the organization has signed off on all of the business rules, or gives you access to the business rules so that you can incorporate them into your application. The final frontier in IT is people. It is people's abilities, it is people's tendencies, it is people's wishes, desires, training, background, culture. All of these things play into what people can and cannot be expected to do effectively with the applications. When we're talking about the people side, we're talking about security, we're talking about the culture, we're talking about their location, physical distribution of data and functionality. Where are these people going to be using the application? All of these kind of things come into play. Obviously, these 4 dimensions or these 4 questions about constraints are not going to give you everything. The 8 questions taken together are going to give you at least a starting point on getting your handle on these ubiquitous NFRs and finding what they are. Of course, once you find them, then you're going to have to figure out how you can make them measurable.